Hey, this is Lance Wallnau, and welcome to this weekly update. Boy, what a week we have. One of my friends just recently played for me what is, if you call the White House and you want to talk to the White House, you want to register your thoughts with, what is it, the president or with the Congress? 202, this is the number, but this is actually the recording that they got.
Thank you for calling the White House comment line. Thank you for calling the White House. Unfortunately, we cannot answer your call today because congressional Democrats are holding government funding, including funding for our troops and other national security priorities, hostage to an unrelated immigration debate. Due to this obstruction, the government is shut down. In the meantime, you can leave a comment for the president at www.whitehouse.gov/contact. We look forward to taking your calls as soon as the government reopens.
Oh my gosh! You know, the reason why that cracks me up is because I could just see this is actually what Donald Trump, the president's line is. This is logic on this thing. Now, I had a little bit of a meltdown last week. It's not an unusual meltdown. It's a typical meltdown. It was one of my late night rants, and I was looking at a picture of Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. I don't have it for you right now, but it's like the two dispositions of these two people were so conspicuous. Schumer, confident and playing the game, and just he has his opponent on the ropes, and then McConnell, kind of looking once again like like the tortoise in the hare, like kind of like just poked out of the shell, and what am I supposed to do? This is distressing. But I have to say, I'm not saying it's because we prayed, but we did pray. We got like around 20,000 people that'll bleed into these 24-hour broadcasts, and they do pray with me on these broadcasts. But the next day, when Ryan came out, and when Representative Ryan came out, and McConnell came out, they came out with their script right, which is this, folks. Listen, we have a challenge nowadays in that we have so much information, we don't know how to focus on the right information, and then when we get any information, we don't know how to go to the depth of what we need to focus on. Let me just put it to you this way: this whole shutdown is the result of the Democrats basically getting everything they want from this phase of negotiation, but rejecting it anyway because the president is not prepared to cave in on immigration. And so immigration, the issue doesn't have to be decided on until March. But the Democrats are saying, no, they want to decide it on in this package because they want to shut down. The Democrats are absolutely set to destroy everything Donald Trump wants to do. And in spite of that, Trump has done amazing stuff around them. But the fact of the matter is, for once, I really believe that because there's unity with Paul Ryan and with McConnell and the White House, because they're lined up in pushing back, I don't think the Democrats are going to get the mileage out of this. I think it's good, even though they control the propaganda mechanisms of all media, with the exception of maybe Fox or something, they're still not going to win. Because I do think that the people recognize that this is a political agitation that's totally driven by the Democrats' agenda to frustrate the president. But there's something about the psychology of this perpetual bombardment, this erosion of rationality that I'm observing, that to me it's like, I keep calling it mind control, and it's witchcraft at a highest level, because you ever have this influence come over you which just binds your mind? I'm telling you, the left has learned how to message stuff with an almost hypnotic embedded command capacity, where they know how to repeat a line over and over and over, even if it's not true. The Russian collusion, the Russian collusion, the Russian collusion. Now, I think pretty much everybody knows that there's no Russian collusion, and what's come out in the documents, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is that the only collusion we really have is that the dossier that was provided as a basis for a Mueller investigation actually came from a company called Fusion GPS. It was written by Russians. It was handled by a guy named Steele in the UK, and was funded by lawyers working for the Clintons. Amazing. I mean, the facts are already out. So understand that Mueller's whole investigation right now is not about Russian collusion. They can't find anything. They're groping, they're looking. They never found anything. You know what they're going to try to do? They're going to try to impeach President Donald Trump on the basis of his interference with their fake hunt for Russian collusion. That's how scary this is in Washington. And there's so many people in the United States that want it to happen. It paralyzes the American system of justice from working. We're having a problem moving forward, which is why Christians have got to listen to me. Christians, this is a spiritual battle. And sometimes I kind of feel like, well, Lord, what the heck am I doing? I shouldn't even be involved with this stuff. Because the more I get involved with this particular front on the battle, the fewer and fewer people I even see that are involved with this battle. Let me ask you a question. Do you want to be, you talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Christian who died as a martyr in Germany, and he stood up to Adolf Hitler, but he stood up too late. The churches stood up too late. The churches did not want to get involved with politics. So they let the nation go to socialism. They let the nation go to the left. And they've just preached and taught and tried to stay away from politics. So guess what? The day came where the political system was so antichrist, it turned around and demanded them to conform, at which point they were too weak to stop it, and they ended up being martyred. At what point are Christians going to, in America, stop surrendering to the asinine rationale that we don't want to get involved with the strife of tongues over politics? Because what you're really dealing with is the demonic front line that is taking place. The battle happens to be in politics because that's where the demons and the angels are colliding. You need to show up where the battle is and not become a critic and a spectator. This DACA situation, which is has to do with the Dreamers, which has to do with the children that came in through illegal immigrants. This is like what the Democrats decided, that they're losing their base. You know why they're losing their base? Because the more educated Americans, even Democrats, get about what the Democratic Party is doing, the less they like it, and they start moving towards somebody like Trump, who will actually restore jobs and restore stability and restore law and order. So for the Democrats to make what they need to make in terms of votes, they have to import millions of people into the country that'll be government dependent, so that the Democrats can promise them things and get votes in return. It's such a sad and obvious strategy that they couldn't even say it in 2006. They had to say the opposite. They had to say exactly what Donald Trump is saying today is what the Democrats were saying in 2006. I could play the tapes for you from Schumer's own mouth. But I'm not going to do that. I want you to listen to the embedded command sequence. This is the hypnosis of the left. This is how they do media. And when I'm doing media more and more, I'm realizing there's certain statements you make. They're pivot statements. In other words, this guy he's an attorney representing the DACA, cause, the Dreamer cause. And Tucker Carlson is going to ask him about, hey, we're seeing total breakdown of disruption on the street with these organized mobs of funded leftists on the cause of Dreamers, and instead of peaceful protest, what you have is shutting down streets and commerce, which is illegal, and then their attorney defending them. You'll always find a lawyer to defend a criminal. The attorney's going to sit here and say they're exercising their constitutional right. But I want you to see this, because Carlson goes, what constitutional right? They're not even American citizens. And the guy goes back and says they're exercising their constitutional right. I'm not saying one time or two times. He says it like 3, 4, 5 times. I stopped recording it because I couldn't take it anymore. But I want you to watch this. You got to see this as this happens.
So this makes, I got to say, I think normal people a lot less sympathetic to so-called dreamers. The idea that you're in a country illegally and you're standing in the middle of an intersection preventing citizens from getting to work. You're making basically violent demands in public when you're not even a citizen. I mean, do you see why maybe this is a counterproductive strategy and kind of offensive?
Well, regardless of whether you agree with the protest or not, they have a constitutional right to express their opinion. But to the point about...
No, actually, stop. Stop with this. I mean, you're a lawyer. They don't have a constitutional right to block me from getting to work in the middle of a public street. I'm sorry, they don't.
You may disagree with it, but again, this is about actually not
it's not disagreeing with it. I'm giving you the fact. You don't have a constitutional right to stand in the middle of the street and prevent traffic from going.
Absolutely, you do. This is about making sure that, and again,
then why were they arrested? Oh, I thought you were a lawyer.
Well, absolutely. Obviously, they're doing the civil disobedience, and obviously they're expressing. That's why they're being arrested, because obviously they're enforcing the law. But again,
okay, so they don't have a wait. I mean, just wait. Hold on. I wouldn't stop you on this small point if you weren't an attorney, the first illegal alien attorney in New York. But just to be clear, you don't have a constitutional right to block traffic. You have a constitutional right as a citizen to express your views. It's protected by the First Amendment, thank God. But you don't have a constitutional right to get in people's way on a public street, period. So I guess my question is, if I try this in Mexico or Venezuela, Honduras, Nicaragua, China, name a country, that would be insane. If I showed up in someone else's country and said, I have a right to influence your political system, they say, you're not even a citizen. Buzz off. I'm blocking traffic now until you pay attention to me. Like, no one would put up with that except us, right?
Well, Tucker, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, they have a constitutional right to express their freedom to speak any opinion, and obviously they're engaged in civil disobedience.
I can't. Do you catch the sentence? I mean, this is so flipped out crazy. They have to memorize the sentence, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. They're simply exercising their constitutional right, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. They're simply exercising their constitutional right, regardless of whether you agree. And Carlson's saying, there is no constitutional right. Well, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. And what I'm saying is this is like this is like a form of hypnosis. And I watch it all the time with the people Tucker's interviews. Do you ever notice this? I mean, we ought to stop the interviews and just replay the playbook, because the left actually is like zombified. And they know what they're doing, by the way. They're embedding in you. Now, did you see those protesters? Honestly, did you see the protesters? I'm going to get in trouble. I don't know, the guy with the shaved head and the ponytail. This is a guy who was chosen to lead and get arrested. This isn't some random, gathering of frustrated masses. This is a group of people that are being trained and funded by the schools on the left, who train people in this kind of form of protest and organized anarchy. The big, beautifully graphic branded sign you see in the background there, which says, all of us or none. What they're saying is, they're dealing with chain migration. They're saying, not just us, but our mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and our aunts and uncles and the families that are back there. In other words, the left is attempting to activate like 13 million illegal immigrants, I think we have in the United States right now, 13 to 20, plus the 800,000 that are here, plus the family members that want to come in, because the left plans on taking over America through opening up the public treasury to foreigners who come into America. And by the way, I showed you a statistic last week, which was shocking to me. 30% of homicides committed in the United States are committed by illegal aliens. In other words, the crime, when President Trump said they're not sending their best and everybody freaked out, what he was saying was actually true in his own blunt way. He was saying the people that are taking advantage of the porous borders are many times the very worst of the people. Because if we could vet them, if we had a process, don't you want to vet who's coming to this country? So I work with pastors that are actually pro DACA and Dreamer. I mean, they are passionate about it, and they'll tell me and they'll give me their spiel about how these people are they're in their churches. It's amazing. They're already here. They're going to church. You say, how can you send them back? And I say, listen, the issue is not about whether or not those people are safe. The issue is what percentage of the population of people coming to the United States are actually going to be good American citizens based on merit with a capacity to contribute to the United States. It's not a racist statement for Trump to say that Haiti and El Salvador are primarily, listen, most churches, you look at where their missions budget is. And you would have to say that the mission budget is going to go to those places that have the greatest poverty, the greatest corruption, the greatest crime, the greatest need. Those would not be the primary places where you're going to be looking to bring in people. That's the places where we're actually exporting aid to go help those nations. So what you want to have a system where people are coming in that are going to be enculturated in a way that they assimilate. The problem with Muslim, nobody wants to say it, it's the politically incorrect thing to say. The reason why there's anxiety amongst thinking people in Europe and the United States about opening the borders to anybody, especially if they have a foreign religion, is that Islam by nature is a religion wrapped around a political system. And most Americans are ignorant of this, that the Islamic faith isn't like Christianity or Buddhism and Hinduism. The Islamic faith is actually a political ideology wrapped around a religious expression. Muhammad was a governmental figure who believed in subduing and discipling. I have often said the thing that I admire about Islam is that they're willing to have martyrs and be more conspicuous about their agenda about making disciples of nations. They're so conspicuous about it that their presidents have to wear clerical garb when they make certain speeches. The first thing a businessman has to do is fund an Islamic training center with his money. I mean, they're out to disciple nations. And it's interesting to me, Christians are called to go disciple nations. We're flat-footed and apologetic about anything that even looks like exercising undue influence in political processes. Islam, at least, is congruent. So, but if it comes into a country and it can't be assimilated, then American culture begins to fragment. But the left loves the fragmentation of American culture. Why do you think they want to not bow? Why do you think they want to take a knee when the American anthem is being played or when a flag is on display? It has nothing to do with what you think it has to do. It has to do with the constant whittling away of consensus regarding what America is, so it can become fragmented enough so that it can be redefined, a fundamental transformation of America. Now, I want you to hear this exchange. This is every now and then we're finding some Trumpian figures that are breaking out in public. This is Bob McElvaney. He's the head of the Office of Budget Management. And what I love about this is this is Costa. This is Mr. Acosta, who got kicked out of the president's office because he's got such an. I've listened to an interview with him on Hewitt, and this Costa guy, he hates this president. This guy's got a demon working on him. Anyway, so he interrupts. Of course, he has to go challenge the White House press briefing on why it is that with a White House that's Republican, a Senate that's Republican, a Congress, why it is that the Republicans aren't responsible for this budget breakdown. And then this guy here, who used to be a congressman, man, he's in a perfect role right here, whacks him right back and says, I got to laugh when people like you say this. Like you don't know it takes 60 votes and we only got 50? We need Democrats to work with us? Watch.
You said this was the Schumer shutdown. How can it be the Schumer shutdown when Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate?
Come on, you know the answer to that as well as anybody. I mean, I have to laugh when people say that, oh, we control the House, the Senate, the White House, why can't you get this done? You know as well as anybody that it takes 60 votes in the Senate to pass an appropriations bill, right? You know that.
I know that.
Okay, so when you only have 51 votes in the Senate, then you have to have Democrat support in order to keep the government, to fund the government. So that's the answer to your question.
The president asked Congress to come up with a solution for the Dreamers. Congress was in the room. Members of Congress were in the room with the president last week. It seemed to be a fairly productive meeting. It seems that the whole process was blown up by the president's comments.
When Republicans tried to add a discussion about Obamacare to the funding process in 2013, we are accused by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer of inserting a non-fiscal, a non-financial issue into the spending process in order to shut the government down. How is that not exactly what is happening today? There is no reason that you have to deal with DACA this week. There's no reason you have to deal with DACA before the end of February, the middle of February. DACA doesn't expire till March 5th. This is purely an attempt by the Senate Democrats, led by Mr. Schumer, it's why we call it the Schumer shutdown, in order to try and get a shutdown that they think this president gets blamed for.
Oh, I'm telling you, this is what I'm talking about. These kind of guys, I love this. Were you paying attention to that? This is the same thing that was done in 2013 when the shoe was on the other foot. Pelosi and Schumer were blaming the Republicans of inserting irrelevant and non-binding other issues into the budget discussion. And Schumer himself, as you're about to see in a minute, even labeled it, like he used a couple of adjectives, like they were absolutely the contempt he had that Republicans. He said for a Democrat to even think of shutting down the government over an immigration issue when it comes to a budgetary, crisis and the flow of government. Ben Shapiro is probably one of the best people in the world as a millennial. He deserves to be the fastest growing blogger that's out there, because Ben Shapiro, with the brilliance of his Harvard-educated Jewish Orthodox close consecutive logical state of mind, he just he talks so fast. He's exactly the kind of pace that I like to listen to. So catch Ben Shapiro discussing the hypocrisy of what's happening with the shutdown.
So Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, who's leading this filibuster fight, let's flash back all the way back to 2013. I know we have to go back a really long ways. It's all 5 years ago. Chuck Schumer, pretty much this date in 2013, was going around suggesting that anyone who shut down the government over an ancillary issue is doing so for their own political purposes. And listen, what about us Democrats? What if we Democrats had shut down the government over illegal immigration? Wouldn't people go crazy? He literally said this in 2013.
Persuaded my caucus to say I'm going to shut the government down. I'm going to not pay our bills unless I get my way. It's a politics of idiocy, of confrontation, of paralysis.
Idiocy, confrontation, and paralysis. He actually did spell out in another one of these interviews, he actually did spell out, he said, listen, I could have shut down the government over immigration reform, but I'd never do that. Now it's 2018. Fast forward to 2018, and here we are. It's just, it is an amazing, amazing thing. So who's going to get blamed for this, right? How is the political fallout going to play? Here's the truth. I don't think people care about government shutdowns. I don't think they cared in 2013. I don't think they care in 2018. I think the press cares. I think people in Washington, D.C. care because their livelihood goes away. I think a bunch of people in Washington, D.C. who cannot function if the government doesn't function. Like, listen, I have a happy life. If the government starts functioning the way that I want it to and it stops being a big deal in my life, I'll just talk about other stuff. I'll just talk about the culture, which I prefer to talk about anyway. I'll sit here and I'll talk about Plato and Aristotle and Aquinas. I'll do all those things. It'll be great. Our listenership may not be as high, but it'll be awesome. Okay, I'm happy to do all of those things. But if you're in Washington, D.C., if you are the political press and you spend all day covering the minutia of all the crap that our politicians do, and then the threat is, ooh, the government's going to shut down, ooh, we're all going to die, then this is a big deal to you. Is this a deal? Is it a big deal to some guy in Idaho? Is it a big deal to you? Okay, here's the reality. Like 90% of all government function continues during a government shutdown. You're still going to get your Social Security checks. Nothing actually stops. Nothing actually stops. The military continues to function, right? If a government shutdown continues entirely, then at some point the Congress can shift funding around that's already available. You know, they can make cuts. You know, I'm all in favor of government shutdowns. I really have no problem with government shutdowns. The government spends $4 trillion a year. It seems to me that a little shutdown wouldn't be the end of the world.
Listen, I get frustrated because I listen to these guys. I'm studying hours of this material, and I have to kind of figure out how to make it interesting and condense it in like 30 seconds. Roughly only 17% of government services are changing right now. Did you know that? You would think that everything, that all planes are crashing, that people are dying, there's food that's not going to the grocery store. Only 70% of government. Now, if you believe, as I do, that government is so strangely overinflated and bloated and lethargic and stuffed that actually we could use a 70% reduction in fat in government, then actually government's probably operating just about right now, except that it's interfering with military payment, with certain checks that are going out for certain causes. But apart from a couple of that are real dramatized inconveniences, and by the way, everybody that's not getting paid during the government shutdown, trust me, they're all getting their money. It's like, okay, so they get it 2 weeks later, but they get it all. So this whole, what Shapiro is saying is absolutely true. What's media going to do? Media is having a meltdown. They absolutely have nothing to do because everything's shut down. They can't. So they're going to hyperinflate. And of course, you're going to hear this ridiculous "people are dying" narrative. And I'll tell you what, people are going to die a lot worse if America doesn't get its budget deficit of $20 trillion under control. Thank God you've got Donald Trump. Thank God you've got this gift in the White House, that just the psychological presence of Donald Trump globally has created an investment bonanza in Wall Street. Now they're worried. I'm reading headlines. They're afraid it's going so hot, it's overheating. Up past 20,000, up past 22, up past 25. Where is it going to stop? It's going to go on to 30,000. My gosh. Anyway, what I want to say is, don't you freak out about the government shutdown. It's all a bunch of drama. And I think it's once the Democrats realize that they're not necessarily gaining anything by this, the Democrats are actually painting themselves into an awkward corner, because the more and more people that could say, why are you putting the interests of people that aren't American citizens ahead of American citizens? The more that argument gets articulated and driven, as you're hearing here and in other sources, the harder it is going for Democrats to make that an issue for the midterms. This is all about midterms. It's all about power. It's all about getting back into power. And that's what's so sad about what's happening in America. Our whole culture is no longer in a discussion of right and wrong. It's in a discussion of who's got the right to impose their will. We're getting into a very dangerous place, which reminds me of my final segment here. I want to talk about this. While I was doing this broadcast, my meltdown broadcast the other night, when I was saying, why is it that Republicans act like they've lost already, and why is it the Democrats who lost act like they're in charge? Democrats always act like they're in charge. Even when they're not in charge, they act like they are. It's really a strange thing, isn't it? So you need to have 2 Republicans for every 1 Democrat, just because one of those Republicans feels embarrassed to be a Republican. So you have to have 2 to 1. But the biggest potential scandal of our lifetime is happening right now. And it's happening as you're hearing about this FISA exposure of a memo that's coming out, this mystery memo. I was doing a broadcast the other night, I was saying a moment ago, and I kept getting these texts. So I'm reading your comments as you're writing to, you're talking to me while I'm talking, and I'm looking and reading your comments, and every now and then a troll grabs my attention, but most of the time it's, helpful. And people kept saying, Lance, watch Hannity, release the memo, Lance, pay attention, release the memo, tell them. So I'm looking at this, and I hadn't watched Hannity yet. So I was doing my broadcast. Of course, I shut this down. I go back and catch up with what the memo is about. Now, FISA. Most people don't even know what DACA or FISA stands for. It's kind of funny. You should do a man on the street, make up what the words mean thing. But it's the Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act, I believe. That's what FISA is. So the Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act is the key piece. Oh, I don't even need this anymore. So the FISA is a court-authorized document that allows the surveillance of private citizens if there's a conviction or a belief that there is terrorism or some kind of RICO crimes or something to justify the investigation. You know, that's that violation of constitutional freedom and privacy. So the big point here is the Clinton campaign. Like I said earlier, they hired a law firm to launder the money to get a hold of a dossier to be written against Donald Trump as opposition research. Now, so far, that's nothing new. But the opposition research actually got, remember, I wish you guys remember these things, because I'm going to say this, and I don't have the ability in my studio now to go back and grab the soundbite, because I don't have like a Rush Limbaugh office here. But I remember saying that McCain's fingerprints are going to be on this thing. And we're not done yet. I believe it's going to come out that McCain actually has his fingerprints on facilitating getting the document to Comey. So that Comey, and even said as much, the dossier, because he said, oh, this is very, he got it, but he knew it was opposition research. But here's the part that I remember. I remember listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio, and and Rush very seldom makes these comments like this. He said, the president just came out and bashed the FBI and the CIA. Ooh, he shouldn't have done that. I heard Rush say that. Ooh, I wish he hadn't done that. Now, you never hear Rush very bold, and many of you have never heard him. Really, you owe yourself the gift of listening to this. He's a prophet, virtually a secular prophet. And he said, you know, they have ways of getting back at you. What's happened since Trump started to bash the FBI and the CIA on wiretapping, and because Trump himself, this is going to sound strange, Trump is a prophet. He's a business prophet, and God's anointed him for government. That means he goes by this gut instinct he has is highly intuitive, and it's and he calls it right when he discerns these big issues. And he sensed there was a conspiracy of corruption in the deep state, but he didn't have a language for it. So when he called out the FBI and the CIA, suddenly the FBI and CIA started working against him. And now he's going to find out how dangerous it is to mess with the intelligence community, as Rush said. But you see, if the man's anointed, you better not touch him. Now we're going to see what happens, because the backlash is coming. So here's what the deal is. We got a fella in charge of that, the House Intelligence Committee. And the guy who's in charge of the House Intelligence Committee is Representative David Nunes. And David Nunes is the majority staff leader of the House Intelligence Committee. And so he's got a memo he came out with, which chronicles in 4 pages the abuses by the intelligence community. I'm talking CIA and FBI, and probably Department of Justice under Obama. This is where it gets dangerous. And the memo was read by more than 150 House members, some of which have gone on television and just shook their heads and said it is disastrous, an implication. Of course, to be understood, the Democrats that read it said, oh, obviously this is simply a misleading set of talking points, all designed to question the credibility of our great institutions like the FBI, which means the FBI was up to no good. Ho-ho! This is going to be a grenade. Now, the question that Rush made a point about, saying don't mess with the intelligence community, this could come back and bite you. Now Rush is saying the president has the authority to force this document to just be disclosed. Because that which is under the Department of Justice, he has the right to be able to say, let's go ahead and make it public. But I believe there's content in here. As you're hearing coming out, about the latest, people are going to ask me inevitably, Lance, what do you think about Donald Trump with some adult porn person a decade ago? Well, I told you, a decade ago. Trump made a decision. He was going to run for president. He was going to be a straight-up kind of guy. And around that period of time, I don't know what he did a decade ago, but I know that 9 years ago, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, this man has been in the arena. He's been conditioning himself for the fight of his life. And so far, he's been a straight-up guy doing what he said he was going to do. But you got yourself a Philistine. I said you got a Philistine, slayer there. You got a Samson. And Samson had Delilah. I'm not shocked that Samson had Delilah. And so why should you be? But right now, the man's living a good life. He's living a lot cleaner than most people. So anyway, what I want you to think about is Russia's saying, why doesn't the president want this thing to be revealed? And he suspects that there's content in there, as you're hearing coming out now, that involves areas that he doesn't want to necessarily have on the front page of his adversary's journal and press. In other words, there's enough content in there that that could be smearing of Trump as well as exposing at the same time of his enemies. And so the fact that he's not calling for it to come out ought to make you wonder what's in it. But we're all guessing at this point, because the reality is, if there is flat out evidence that the intelligence community, as we already know, had conspired together in order to create a false information and then use it as though it was true to justify spying on the transition team, out of which Flynn and all these other things came out, well, then we have an abuse of those powers that are invested in our institutions, and such abuse should call those people into public account for the abuse of power. At no point should we be expecting this is going to go away. We just can't get as hyperventilated about the implications of it. Some people think it's going to end up stopping the Mueller investigation. I don't want to make you guys mad at me. I'm not so sure it's going to stop the Mueller investigation, because I think that there's I don't always think that the wheels of justice actually work that way. I think what it can do is it could stop public support in sentiment in support of the investigation, and it can render it really impotent, because Americans would be so disgusted with the collapsed faith in their own institutions that once you start having some prosecutions and some additional meetings going on, which are going to embarrass the Democrats with the intelligence community, here's what I predict: that the Democrats are going to try to move this thing to the point where they can approach impeachment arguments. But if they start getting embarrassed by public meetings disclosing their role of complicity in the intelligence community, they'll back down and shut the investigation down themselves, because what they really want to do is use it to annihilate Donald Trump's hopes of retaining the House and Senate in the midterms, 2018. Midterms. Anybody talk about midterms? I'm amazed at the number of intelligent Christians I talk to who think that because Donald Trump was elected, in 2016, that the next big battle is 2020. It's not. 2020 is lost. It's lost already if there's no 2018 victory, because the Democrats have already shown that if they can succeed in getting the House, they will impeach this president, and they will bludgeon him with that impeachment issue until he is a crippled candidate in 2020. So the only thing that is left for us is to be vigilantly aware of what's happening and stay in prayer and show up. You really, really, really need to take seriously the call to get involved in your own local school board, your own local city council, your own local, because the left is so energized in their frustration over Donald Trump's existence that you're watching a grassroots revival. But it's not a revival of God's influence, it's a revival of leftist influence, because Christians and conservatives don't want to move into the conflict. We are just conflict avoidance people. We don't like it. Sheep, for the most part, aren't fighting goats. It takes a rare move to get sheep to do what they've got to do. But I'm telling you, at a local level, you need to get yourself involved with the battle. All right, this is Lance Wallnau. We're going to be giving you more information as the midterms approach on the candidates, on the dates. Listen, there's some primaries going on right now that are critical to the success of the future. They're happening already in March, April, May. Did you know that? That there's already critical positions being attained in the battle that's coming up. And all government right now is part of spiritual warfare. That's why we need to pray for rulers and those who are in authority, that we may lead a godly and peaceful life. Father, we thank you in Jesus' name for what you're doing in America. We thank you what you're doing and the even shaking up the system and the status quo. We believe, Lord, that you're giving us supernatural wisdom, discerning, and prophetic insight into your people, that we can move in greater power and agreement and influence than ever before in the history of America. May the church rise up and as peacemakers bring us in through the crucible into a new era. In Jesus' name, amen.